Today here at K-Series Parts, we've teamed up with our boys over at Action Clutch. We're gonna show you guys how to get these products installed. People are doing them wrong every once in a while, and they've given us the opportunity to show you guys the right way to do this. Let's dive into it, here we go. All right, for our example, we're gonna be throwing a K-Series clutch and flywheel combo from them in. If you guys have any questions about what you need to get to do a clutch or flywheel and all that kind of stuff, feel free to reach out to them with your year, make, model. Horsepower and torque numbers, if you know them, help. Their kits are awesome. They're packaged really well. They come with merch, all sorts of cool stuff. Throw-out bearing and clutch alignment tool, which we'll talk about further later on in the video. But for now, I'm gonna kind of dive into what all comes in their kits. So, you got your flywheel, you got your pressure plate, and then tucked already in there is your clutch. We will be popping these zip ties off, and I'll kind of show you guys how to get this installed. Oh, it's packaged so well. Jesus Christ. Okay, so, let's get the pressure plate, flywheel, clutch combo separated. So this red component right here, this is your pressure plate. Throw-out bearing will apply pressure on this to relieve the clutch. So every time you push the clutch pedal in, this guy is gonna smash against these fingers properly and release the clutch. Pressure plate. Next order of business, we got our clutch. Labeled flywheel side. Obviously you could install it wrong, but since they're labeled, you know which way faces out. This is the guy that takes all the power. So your motor produces a bunch of spinny boys, and your transmission has to receive the spinny boys. And all this mating material, that's what transfers the pressure. And finally, we have our flywheel. Now flywheels look pretty simple, but you can't really see it. This is actually machined in a very specific way. You shouldn't really be touching it with your hands like I just did, but obviously we clean these like crazy before we actually install them. You want absolutely no sort of contamination on your flywheel, on your clutch, on your pressure plate. That all needs to be sanitary. Any sort of contamination is a big no-no. That includes oil leaks, that includes grease, anything like that. You do not want to have any of that kind of stuff. All it'll do is cause premature failure on those components. We're gonna go ahead and get this installed on the engine. We're gonna jump over to there and dive in and kind of show you guys how to do all of this. All right, first step in installing a clutch, flywheel. Oh wait, you know what? No, can't do this yet. If your leaking, don't throw a clutch on. Fix your damn oil leaks. You got a rear main seal, you got a head gasket, you got valve cover, you got all sorts of stuff depending on your motor. Make sure this thing is bone dry. If it's gonna leak, it's gonna leak back here. It's gonna destroy your clutch. Keep it dry. It's the one time we want things dry. And before installing your flywheel, make sure that this mating surface is nice and smooth. You don't want any sort of rust, any sort of chips, or anything from the old flywheel. If this isn't smooth and nice and flat, this isn't gonna mate properly and it's gonna get in there all wobbly and cause all sorts of issues. So before we even start, no oil leaks, and make sure this mating surface is nice and smooth. But if that's the case, should just pop right on there. Now, got some really exciting news. ARP and Action have actually teamed up and got some cool bolts coming out. We often recommend replacing these every single time you can. The ARP ones you can reuse. But these things are nice, like real freaking nice. Some manufacturers actually want you to put Loctite on these, put thread sealant on them, because sometimes behind these bolts there's actually oil passages. I know from experience that JZ's, for example, actually will leak oil out of these bolts if you do not thread seal them. So make sure you guys pay attention to your manufacturer specifications. Same thing with torque procedure and torque ratings. Always follow the manufacturer recommended procedure. Most of the time it's gonna be a torque pattern and a two-step torque process. So we're gonna dive into that. I'm gonna go ahead and do this for the K-Series since that's what we have on hand, but refer to your guys' OEM manufacturer and see what they want you to do. Another thing is too, guys, always hand start your bolts. These are very fine thread, as you can see. You'll strip these really easily. Put them in by hand. Don't use power tools on this stuff. You can save time other places. This is a very crucial step, and if you strip these out, you're replacing the crank in your motor or possibly trying to rethread it. So, take your time, do it right, or buy a new crank. You're stupid. Alright, so one of the big benefits of the ARP Action flywheel bolts is they are significantly stronger than OEM. And what I mean by that isn't necessarily that the bolt is stronger, it's how it works with the flywheel. So these will actually prevent the flywheel from having any sort of rotational stress. They don't move at all. So the OEM ones could actually cause the hole to waller out a little bit, and these ones are machined a lot tighter and they're a little bit stronger. So it just works better altogether. Highly recommend getting these if you're going to be throwing a flywheel on. A few bucks more, but it's a lot more peace of mind. They'll take a bunch more horsepower too. Alright, so now that you got all your bolts spun in by hand, torque them down to spec. Like I said, look at your OEM manufacturer specification. Do it to all of them. Make sure they're all perfectly tight. And then we're going to jump on to getting your pressure plate and your clutch all installed. So, here we go. Alright, now we get the flywheel all torqued down and installed properly according to OEM manufacturer specifications. We are on to our pressure plate and clutch combo. You have a clutch. What the clutch does is it actually sits on your transmission shaft. So there is an input shaft on your transmission. Obviously this one is not installed in transmission, but that's how it works. So the clutch is always spinning with your transmission, but the pressure plate is actually what engages and disengages the clutch. So what you need to do is put both of these on the flywheel. The clutch is labeled flywheel side and obviously pressure plate side. Easiest way to do this is the provided clutch alignment tool. Slide that through there, hold both of these together, and we're gonna walk over to the motor. Now as you can see, you have these 3 pins right here. Those will actually line up with the 3 holes that are located throughout. Now using the clutch alignment tool is going to make this a lot easier to get installed and slid on there in the proper function. This does take a few tries. Take your time, it's not easy. Alright, so once you've got your pins all aligned and your clutch alignment tool is centered in there, start tossing the pressure plate bolts in. Once again, hand start everything. You don't need to use power tools with this stuff. Save time elsewhere. Don't risk it. So all I'm doing right here is actually getting the bolts to where they're touching the pressure plate. So I'm gonna get rid of this gap. That, I want it to stop right about there. You'll start to feel it get tight. We're not trying to make this bolts bottom out yet. Don't do that yet. Just get them where they're touching. I'll explain why here in just a second. Torque procedure on pressure plates. 10 to 13 foot-pounds for the first step, and we always go across from each other. So you're gonna see, I'm only gonna go to 13 pounds right here. And yes, it's gonna take a while, but you wanna do this by hand. All right, on to the next bolt. Always go across. So I tighten this one, I'm gonna go exactly across from it and tighten the one opposite to the same torque. Okay, we're gonna repeat that process for the rest of the bolts. I'm gonna go here, I'm gonna go here, 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 and here. So always across. Boom, 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 boom. Once those are all torqued to 13, we'll go to step 2. Let me go to get that taken care of. All right, now that they're all tightened down to 13 foot-pounds, we're gonna repeat that same step, but we're gonna go up to 23 foot-pounds. So, like I said, cross pattern, keep that going. Once you have all of the bolts tightened down to 23 foot-pounds, guess what? Your clutch is installed. Next thing, pull this out. See how easily that came out? See how I'm able to just slide it in and it pulls right back out? That tells me that the clutch is perfectly aligned with the pilot bearing. It's going to make it a lot easier for the transmission to slide into its home without actually damaging the clutch. So, you just installed your clutch. Now it's time to throw the transmission on. Let's dive into that. But before we throw the transmission on, you want to make sure that you have your alignment dowels in place. If you are missing these, do not attempt to throw your transmission on. You'll have a bad time. These actually keep the motor and transmission perfectly in line. You think the bolts do, but the bolt's entire job is to make sure everything is clamped down and tight. These little sleeves are super crucial, so make sure you have those. Okay, so if you're sliding your transmission on and it feels like it doesn't want to seat, and what I mean by seat is the transmission doesn't want to completely bottom out against the motor, do not use the bolts to suck it in. Something isn't lined up, and that's okay, that happens every once in a while. Simply slide it back off, install your clutch alignment tool again, re-torque the pressure plate after loosening it, and try again. These things take a few times every once in a while, and that's completely okay. But whatever you do, do not use the bolts to suck in the transmission. You can cause a lot of damage to the clutch. You can damage the transmission, you can break things. If you want to spend more money and be stupid, go for it, but we really don't recommend it. So, just tighten things down the right way. Make sure the transmission is mated up perfectly to the motor before tightening the bolts down. Easy as that. Got transmission installed, all that stuff is good to go, but you're not done yet. Throw out bearing. A few different styles of these, but the principle's all the same. This pushes against these fingers, and that's what puts the vehicle in neutral. So, if this is putting too much pressure on this without you touching it, it's gonna cause issues. If it's too far away, not as much of a big deal. You need to figure out what that adjustment is and where it's at. There's multiple different ways, different manufacturers have different adjustments. Sometimes it's in the slave cylinder, sometimes it's actually in the clutch pedal stop. If you fail to do this, you end up with results like this. See how this is missing fingers? That's because this thing was pushing down so hard on it that it literally broke these fingers off. So pay attention to that. And sometimes if you have it just a little bit over adjusted, you're actually going to overheat it. This clutch didn't last very long because it was constantly getting pressure slipping on it. So get the best bang out of your buck. Follow this procedure. If you guys have any questions in the comments or anything like that, feel free to reach out to us. Thanks for tuning in, guys. See you next time.